All right, so let's talk about tier 5 storage. All right, where did it come from? What's it used for? What the opportunities are. And by the way, this fits square in one of Santosh's objectives for data optimization. Absolutely. All right. So I'm going to tell you how we got here. This was actually an idea I had that came out of a failed DR test. All right. I'll show you what happened. So a database server is made up of a bunch of ones, right? They lay the database file system across it, and we replicate the whole darn thing to Dallas, right? And in a DR, we come up here, right, on the database. Well, maybe about a year and a half ago, we had a database server that would not come up in DR. And when we did the forensics on it, we said, what is missing? What's missing from the database? And the DBA said, oh, it's the U10 mount point. We can't find the U10 mount point disk. We said, what's the U10 mount point? How is it different than the U4 mount point of the main database? They said, oh, that's our archive tables. And then they said, and we don't need that to come up for DR. I said, wait. So you've got an archive database that's not necessarily needed to come up in DR. What is the requirement for the archive database? Right, so this was, by the way this happened was a bad storage allocation. They requested single site storage because the DBA is thinking it doesn't need DR. Right? This is a typical situation where the technician in the seat doesn't fully understand what they're asking for, what they need, or the storage team doesn't ask the right questions, or the storage team doesn't deliver what they believe to be the request. There's lots of ways this stuff can get off the rails, but in a simple case, the DBA knows he doesn't need the archive table, right? Except for one problem. The DBA before him had requested replicated. So when we expanded the U10 archive file system, half of it was replicated, half of it wasn't, right? So the server wouldn't come up at RDC. We were able to go in at a minimum boot and exclude U10 from mounting. We brought it up and got through the DR. But that got me thinking. When the DBA said, we don't need archive tables, I went to talk to the DBAs about what is this archive stuff, right? And basically, what I found from them was there's a very typical database technique to keep things trim and performing, to move age data out of the primary transactional database into an archive database, all right? So if you know anything about databases, you got your archive, and I'll call it the transaction, right? Oracle, Sybase, whatever the database is, has the ability to join them, right? Logically join them, but physically they can be on different disks, right? So that really got me thinking. When you've got something like the GTR in Netherlands, 30 terabyte Oracle, it's never been groomed, all right? They've never done any kind of archiving in this database. So I asked the DBAs, so you do archiving on that system, even though the DR was broken. That's since repaired. You do archiving there. Why don't you do it here? Here. on this monster database that's almost impossible to back up, it's so big. And they said, we never got business requirements to do that. Okay. All right. So the wheels start turning. And I start asking about, how frequently do you touch this stuff? The answer I got for this particular database in the failed DR was, we think it was touched once. So you rarely touch it, meaning it doesn't need performance. It does need to be replicated because in a disaster you want the archive, right? If we lost New York forever, you got to have the archive, right? So the DBAs were incorrect saying it didn't need to be replicated. It really does need to be replicated, but it has no business being on $10,000 a terabyte storage when it was referenced once since it was created, right? Business needs it, that's the requirement, but there's no performance expectation for this stuff. So I started thinking. And for a long time, our NAS vendor, NetApp, has been suggesting that NFS protocol is very good protocol for running Oracle. Oracle, you know, their claims are, of course, Oracle recommends it, or Oracle's entire, you know, data farm is on NetApp NAS. May all be true, but the fact of the matter is, I need something cheap to house archive tables on, and NetApp NAS was a solution. And here's the economics, okay? So, Tier 1 VMAX is $10,000 a terabyte. Now, that's licensing, disk, all the stuff, right? $10,000 a terabyte. NetApp NAS, I said, show me your cheapest offering. It doesn't have to perform, right? It's still resilient. It's got, you know, dual controllers and stuff like that. But it's all SATA disk. So if you remember the discussion from before, SATA disk doesn't perform real well. They're big, slow disks, but that's okay. Tier 5, NetApp, NFS, all SATA. Hello, $400 a terabyte. All right, an order of magnitude cheaper than the Tier 1. So let's think about what this can solve. All right, so you got a 30 terabyte Oracle database that's got performance problems because it's so big. It's got backup problems because it's so big, right? And no business requirements ever developed to trim this down to the important data, right? In most, I don't want to say most is oversimplified. Many databases, the most frequently accessed data is the last data put in. The last week, the last month, the last quarter, right? By the time you get 2-year-old data, it's rarely referenced. And if you think about GTR, which is a trade repository, we generate the trade activity reports, the position reports, etc., every day on the latest submissions. And the notion of going back and looking at old submissions, we need to be able to do it, but we rarely actually do it, right? So, talk to the DBAs, we talk to the business, and we find out that we can immediately reduce this by 15 terabytes. So 15 terabytes primary, 15 terabytes archive. All right. And it begins to look like, hey, this is great. I'm going to get better performance because the database is smaller. I'm going to get easier backup and restore times because the database is smaller. Now, is this as big as the opportunity is? Probably not. We could probably work with the business and do even more. I'm just giving you an example here, right? But here's how it works. I've got Vmax, and I've got NetApp, right? Here's your server. We present the storage from both plants to the server, right? This happens to be Fiber Channel. This happens to be IP. The beauty of this is the Oracle ASM file system doesn't care. We can literally build a file system across the divergent kinds of storage.
Well, isn't this already on vBlock?
No.
What is this on right
Oh, I'm sorry. This is on vBlock in Netherlands.
now?
We're getting more and more. Like we built the NetApp for all the other environments, but we haven't executed against the opportunities.
He has the platform, he hasn't moved the database, it's archived storage and reclaim that storage.
Correct.
Now, you have to, one thing with this strategy, because I've implemented this a number of times, you have to make sure it's extremely clear to the DBA that that's not just a standard line.
Yes.
And he needs to make sure he puts it in the right place, because if he takes that disk and he concatenates it and tosses it in with the rest of his stuff, really bad things are going to happen. Really
Yes.
quickly.
So this is going to happen in Netherlands?
It's already happened.
So we had, oh, it's already happened?
Yes.
Oh,
What hasn't happened, there's many more facets to this. We'll walk there.
Okay.
Look at the technology first, and then we'll talk about the business challenges of getting to where I see us getting, all right? So, you create the ASM file system. This is a horrible pen. So the ASM file system can span the two storage types, and the DBAs have the understanding of what's what to put transaction tables here and archive tables here. And since it's one big file system to Oracle, it magically works, right? Now, that's super simplifying it, because here's the rest of what needs to happen. And Santosh, this is actually on your list of data management objectives, all right? You and I will sit down and really frame this out one-on-one, who to talk to, et cetera, et cetera. But here's in Ed's perfect world, here's how this works. First of all, I think the 15 terabytes is way too much. I'm guessing that it's more like this. It's probably 5 terabytes and 25 terabytes, right? Probably. 5 terabytes is a lot of data, all right? We got to figure out logically with the business, how far back do you actually expect to run reports frequently, right? That's the first thing. Second thing is, this is always growing. The database is always growing, right? So what should happen is this. All new data goes in here. And every month, we run an archive job to move the oldest month of data down to tier 5. Automated, and just that should be how we do all of our oracles. All of our oracles need this. So we've got this sort of in place in one place, all right? They did the initial push. So the automation isn't there yet. Automation, number one. Number two, this is in place in one database. How many databases do we have? 400?
no.
So now you know what your objective is. You gotta find all these databases, and we need the plan from the DBAs and the business to exploit the Tier 5 archiving scheme fully automated.
Is REA the point of contact? Who's
REA is definitely a point of contact.